Hello. So today we are going to chat about the direct impacts of networkism. But first, a reminder, this is brought to you by Root. Root is a delightful school that has a Root Fellowship, which is a community of world-class systems thinkers looking to understand and build the future. If you'd like to learn more, check out root.co. Also a reminder, hello everybody on the internet. I hope you're doing well. I wish the best for you and the people you love. Okay, so we're chatting about networkism, and we're in section 2 of the whole course. And within section 2, we're at video 3, video C, which is the direct impacts of networkism. Last time we chatted about the mechanisms, and next time we'll chat about institutional impacts, but today we'll chat about direct impacts. So we'll mostly chat about, first, why are we learning about this? And then the impacts of information abundance, too much information, and then also the impacts of permissionlessness, the fact that there's protocols with low friction. Okay, so why are we learning about this? Well, primarily it's because it's a pattern that we can slot things into. When we think about the impacts of the internet, we can say, that is information abundance. That's the underlying issue here. Or, that is permissionless protocols. This is super low friction, and that is both good and bad. So let's start with information abundance. As a reminder, there's a lot of information out there now, and some of it's bad, and some of it's good. So you remember that the the Industrial Revolution gave us stuff, right? It increased the GDP of everybody in the world. It provided me with t-shirts and all kinds of things. While the information revolution gives us information. And so there's lots more information now. And the long-term hope is that we can turn that information into knowledge and wisdom. Cool, so let's dive into the information abundance piece and all the sub-impacts there. The first is that, when there's a lot of information, you're just that's not going through trusted third parties, you're going to get a lot of fake news, and you're going to be in a post-truth world. So on the left side here, we have this, the printing press, 1440, and how many books got printed? Wow, a lot of books. And you can look at, if you go to fake news on Wikipedia, there's a lot of fake news with the original printing of books. There was a trusted third party, aka the Catholic Church, that had the Word of God, but then you got all kinds of crazy people posting stuff, creating books about all kinds of crazy things. Some of them may be good, like Luther and the Protestant Reformation, and some of them may be bad, where it's just scams. And so too with the internet. We have a lot of good information out there. It's amazing. And a lot of bad information out there. Anti-vax, conspiracies, etc. The second point here is that information abundance helps us shine a spotlight on things. So when there's more information, that just means we'll be able to see more stuff. As an example of this, let's use the recent George Floyd killing and the protests. So this basketball player, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, has a great line about racism in America. And he says, "African Americans have been living in a burning building for many years, choking on the smoke as the flames burn closer and closer. Racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even if you're choking on it, until you let the sun in. Then you see it's everywhere. As long as we keep shining that light, we have a chance of cleaning it wherever it lands. But we have to stay vigilant because it is still always in the air." So that's the idea here, is that you have something like racism in society, which is, it always exists, essentially, at least for now. And we'll always have stereotypes and those kind of things. And sometimes you can't see it, but then, once you actually see it, you're like, oh God, the dust is in the air, and you can really see it once the light is there. And as an example of this, you have, with these police killings, they have shined light on this dust. So in 1991, with Rodney King was a man who was beaten in Los Angeles, and someone at the time, the video recorders were just starting to become a thing, and someone got that video recording, saw it, and then posted it to, a local news station who then shared it. And that then got everybody angry, very angry, because this beating it's a very sad thing. And similarly with George Floyd, you have a bunch of people taking smartphone video of his killing. And as a result, that can then spread and shed light on these really bad things that may have been happening in the shadows, or were definitely happening in the shadows in the past, but we weren't able to see. And similarly with protests, this is a thread of, this is right here. This was taken a long time ago, but this is 346. That's the number that they were on, of protest videos of police brutality in protests. And so, when everybody has a smartphone, the brutality gets, bad things get a light, and good things too. Okay, so C, the third idea here, is aggregation theory. That's a key impact of information abundance. So the idea here, and this is from this guy Ben Thompson from Stratechery, is that you have essentially the internet allows you to connect to any consumer in the world, all for zero marginal cost. If I am Facebook and I want to meet some new if I want to get a new customer over there in Bangladesh, well, they just go to facebook.com and boom, they are now my customer. They are now on Facebook. They're now my user. That idea that anybody can access a thing on the internet all for zero marginal cost, that means that the things that win, they start to win big because they can just acquire more and more people at zero marginal cost. So Netflix here as an example, you start to be Netflix, you start to create some great content, you start to aggregate all of this cool, or you start to get all these great content on the back end, and then anybody in the world can just access it by going to netflix.com. And so this idea of aggregation theory, it really switched where businesses were able to, essentially where their leverage points were. Where in the past, something like a newspaper, they had to really focus on their distribution, because distribution for them was crucial. If you're New York Times, you have to have all these trucks and stuff to send the newspaper everywhere. But then something like Facebook comes along and it just says, oh, nope, that costs $0 now. And because that costs $0, we're just going to aggregate all the people to our good website, and it's going to be difficult for you, New York Times, to survive. So that's the idea behind aggregation theory. It aggregates demand, or it aggregates the consumers. And then once you aggregate all the consumers, then all the suppliers, all the media organizations, anybody else on the back end kind of has to play by your rules. So for Netflix, that's why you have companies being like, oh, Netflix we just want to be on your platform, movie studios and things like that, because that's the way that they access consumers. And if they don't get on Netflix, well, the consumers won't even see it at all. A key part of aggregation theory is that it has a reinforcing feedback loop, which is why we get really big organizations like Facebook with 2 billion users. If you have really good user experience, people will come to your website. People will want to come to Facebook because it is amazing. Let's go to Facebook and see all your friends. That gives you all this attention. And in that attention, everybody being on Facebook means that all the suppliers, all the companies, all the media organizations need to go to Facebook. And then all the suppliers being there makes the experience better. It both gives Facebook data, and all the suppliers are there. And so if you want to learn about a company or whatever, you go to Facebook. So this is this reinforcing feedback loop that the user experience leads to more attention, which leads to more suppliers needing to be there, which leads to the company being able to make their user experience better and better, leading to more attention. So that is aggregation theory. And aggregation theory leads to these natural monopolies, right? Where you have this underlying feedback loop that's really powerful. And then you get these huge, aggregators or platforms or monopolies. And you can see this with this graph that we showed earlier of how important internet companies are. So the graph on the left is, in 1995, Windows and Intel were kind of important. They were in the top 20 top market cap companies in the world. But then in 2016 on the right, these orange ones, that's GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. Oh boy, they're really important. They're 4 of the top 5 are these aggregators. So yeah, you have these huge natural monopolies. And the kind of sad thing here, or not sad, it's just the truth, is that we may have seen these monopolies may just stay. Just like at the beginning of when cars were just starting to be created. You can see this new American car companies in the 20th century. Wow, in the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, lots of people were making cars. There were all kinds of car companies happening. Lots of experimentation. There was a new self-organizing system. And then essentially Ford won, right? They created Model Ts. People loved Model Ts. That gave Ford more money, which allowed them to make their processes even more efficient and more cost efficient, which allowed them to produce more Model Ts, and then more people bought them, and just a reinforcing cycle. And so similarly with internet aggregators, we may just have these, it's not like anybody's trying to build the next Facebook. That's kind of hard because the natural monopoly is so strong there. This leads to the 4th point D here, that there's this paradox on the internet of niches in the long tail. And what I mean by this is the long tail is this yellow part here where you have, that means, so there's two sides here. First is Reddit on the left is the green. That is these big winners. That's all these aggregators. That's something like Reddit. And you have these massive big aggregators. But then you also have this long tail of all the things that are built on top of Facebook, or all of these subreddits. This is a picture of a bunch of random personal finance subreddits. There are so many subreddits. I think there's like 1 million subreddits, 300,000. So, you have this weird paradox on the internet where you both have these huge aggregators, these big winners, and you have this really, really long tail of all the other random stuff on the internet because it's so cheap to do things on the internet still. So that's kind of the paradox, is that zero marginal cost leads to both big winners, but also this 1,000 flowers blooming in this long tail of stuff. As an example of this, networked influencers are part of this long tail. So you have the traditional media versus networked influencers. And with something like COVID, here's a good example. The media didn't do the best job at the beginning with COVID, and they had some reflective pieces, said, oh, what went wrong with the media's coronavirus coverage? Can we do better? There's this picture here of all these different coronavirus people in February and March saying like, COVID's not a big thing. And that was an issue because, that was an issue. But with the long tail and with lots of both good info and bad info, well, you had these, people with COVID who were actually they were on the good info side. They were warning people in January, February, March, hey, everybody, I think we should probably be worried about this. It's in China now, but it could be coming to us soon. And so, I think this is an example of the long tail and the ability for the long tail to have good info within it. Okay, so to conclude, information abundance leads to both, some bad info, fake news and post-truth stuff, some good info, shining a spotlight. It leads to these aggregation theory, aggregating all the consumers, and then also this paradox of big winners while also having this long tail and small niches. So the TLDR is that there's lots of info, both good and bad. Aggregators are organize that fire hose of info and prioritize it for you. And then niches kind of ignore the fire hose and just talk to you directly. Okay. So what does information abundance feel like in your body? Well, this is maybe just me, but long-term optimistic that my body and my mind have this sense that although we have these crazy new protocols that create good and bad things, and although there are these big winners and a lot of these small niches, that it's cool that we'll be able to work through that over time, really push for good information, start to work with these big aggregators to make them better for society, and also, allow for this beautiful niche, all these beautiful niches to continue to form. Okay, interactive time. So the first question is, how can you personally leverage the idea of a niche? This is this idea of a personal monopoly. How can you exist on the internet, form a niche, and then bring people into your niche? The second question is, if consumers like the user experience of aggregators, should we break them up? This is like, and these are issues that people are having from a legal perspective around aggregators and, big tech is, well, if everybody likes it, if the consumer surplus, if the aggregators aren't actually taking away consumer surplus, if they're still like doing a pretty good job and consumers love them, is it actually an issue? Okay, so now let's chat about the impacts of permissionlessness. And the idea here is that protocols and decentralization create these permissionless networks and unstoppable code. And so what that means is that you have these protocols that are created, like TCP/IP, and then those anybody can start engaging with them, and so you get these decentralized networks, and that's cool, but it means that they're permissionless, and it means that it's kind of unstoppable. This code, it's going to fly around the internet no matter what you say. Like, the government can't get in there. So the key idea here is with something like a protocol, TCP/IP, it sends these packets in an unopinionated way. What that means is you have this protocol, TCP/IP, it just is going to take the bits, the zeros and ones, it's going to put them in its little box, its packet, and it's going to say, well, where do you want me to send them? Oh, great, I'm going to send them over there. Great, it goes over there. It doesn't look inside and determine, is this child pornography or is this something bad? It sends them no matter what. And because anybody can implement the protocol, it leads to decentralization. So this picture on the left is a bunch of routers all around the world and in the internet. There's so many. It's like, who would you even, if you wanted to stop the child pornography, where do you stop it? Can you stop it at this server? Well, no, there's so many servers out there. And similarly here on the right, this is Bitcoin. Because anybody can run a Bitcoin server or a Bitcoin node, well, you have tens of thousands of Bitcoin nodes all around the world. So it's tough for a government to come in and say, you need to shut down node. Well, it's like, well, cool, there's going to be 10,000 others, so try your best. So that is how this decentralization is created. And one way to think about this is that this permissionlessness both happens at the code level, where the TCP/IP sends the packets in an unopinionated way, and it also happens at the norms level. And this happened in the beginning of the internet with a declaration of the independence of cyberspace by this guy, John Perry Barlow. And this was happening at the beginning of the internet in 1996. And he wrote, "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. Governments derived their just powers from the consent of the governed. You have neither solicited nor received ours. We did not invite you. You do not know us, nor do you know our world. Cyberspace does not lie within your borders. We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before." Whoa. So our boy John here, he's saying, hey, governments, don't try to get up in here. Let us send whatever we want on the internet. Let us create this new, in his mind, beautiful society that is away from your world. You don't have sovereignty here. You just get out. And this is an example of, in addition to the like TCP/IP being a unopinionated protocol, that was part of the norms of the early internet, where they were saying like, hey, governments, don't get up in here. We don't want you here. We want to do things our way, and you don't be in here. Allow us to do things in a permissionless way, essentially. And so some of the problems, though, with unstoppable code is that, I mean, you get a lot of stuff. First is you get illegal activity. You have this picture from the last video of Usenet communities. Well, actually, all these ones on the right here are quote unquote legit ones. There's, France and the Netherlands and Denmark and whatever, Italy. That's all the communities on the right. But on the left, these are all part of alt, which is essentially means illegal. So all these are porn and drugs and things like that. And it's because they weren't allowed on the main side. So they created this alt community. And then that alt community eventually, I think it took up 80, right here, it looks like it's taking up, 60% or something. I think it was like 80% of all Usenet activity was in alt. And so you get this, illegal activity. The code's unstoppable. It's permissionless. Well, send whatever you want on the internet. And that is, it's especially clear with something like Bitcoin, where with information, we kind of allow people to send whatever they want. It's like, send it here, send it there, whatever. It's not going to be that hurtful. Except with something like, child pornography is where people start to say, okay, we cannot send that over the internet. But with Bitcoin, it's like, well, you shouldn't be able to send anybody money. You shouldn't be able to send a terrorist money over the internet. Or, for an example here, on the Silk Road, you shouldn't be able to send people money to buy illegal drugs. That was the idea, whether you agree or disagree. And the crucial concept here is that this unstoppable code, it allows us to disobey just or unjust laws. It allows us to disobey the laws. And the question is, are they just or are they unjust? For something like the Silk Road, some people think that it should exist, that anybody should be able to do whatever drugs they want because it's only hurting themselves or whatever. And similarly, there are these countries on the right where you can't be homosexual. And so for some folks on the right, in order to do things like, if you want to give or receive, if you want to chat with people on the internet, if you're a gay person in one of these countries, it would be more difficult to go through normal things, but maybe you could go through the internet. It's permissionless. And so that's amazing. You can actually chat with people who you want to chat with and go around those unjust laws. So just the code allows you to go around the laws. That's the idea. And whether the laws are just or unjust, that's up for debate. And so the second idea here is that permissionlessness decreases friction in feedback loops. That means we know that protocols decrease friction in general, that you just can send stuff wherever, permissionlessness, without checking with the government or your mom or whoever. And that's kind of good, but it also means that these feedback loops go a lot faster. So something like aggregation theory on the left here, wow, you just get, this feedback loop for Facebook was just hypercharged. They were able to go from 10 users to 100 users to 1,000 users to 1 million users to 1 billion users pretty quickly because these feedback loops were low friction. Aggregation theory is based off the idea that someone like Facebook has a zero marginal cost of getting new customers and getting new users and getting new advertisers. And because of that, wow, they can just grow super, super big, super, super quickly. So that's both a positive and a negative. Similarly, on the right, there's this hurt people dynamic where on the internet, wow, I mean, if you outrage, if I'm outraged at you, you're outraged at me, we go back and forth, and there's no friction in the loop there to say, let's just take a breath maybe for a second. Imagine if you were trying to have an angry internet debate over a letter. That would be harder because you'd have to send it to them, you have to wait 3 weeks, they'd send it to you, etc. And this is very connected to the idea of free reach versus free speech. So we know, and there's so many free speech debates on the internet these days. The idea is that within normal free speech, we know it's illegal. Most free speech is legal. Hooray, it's amazing. But it's illegal if you yell fire in a crowded theater. Why? Because it creates physical harm. So if I just go into a crowded theater, I yell fire, and 10 people die, well, my free speech is not protected there because I hurt people. And similarly, on the internet, well, it gets kind of confusing. If you send Bitcoin, BTC, to a terrorist, is that okay? Or if you encourage racism or are mean to someone on the internet, is that okay? Or is that how the connection to physical harm is more difficult to tell when it's on the internet because it's a world of bits versus a world of atoms. And so that's what people mean by free speech versus free reach is, yes, you should be able to say whatever you want on the internet, but maybe it shouldn't be able to spread all over the place. Maybe you shouldn't get that free reach. If I say something like, I hate all the Jews or something like that, which I don't, then maybe that shouldn't just spread everywhere. That's probably not great. And so this free reach is adding these frictions into the system. It's saying, let's not spread stuff like that, or let's make it harder to find the stuff that's maybe worse for people. So that's the idea of free reach versus free speech. It kind of takes this graph of good info and bad info being equal and says, you know what? Let's just make it so the good info is easier to find and the bad info is harder to find. So let's add a little bit of friction back into the system. So platforms do insert this friction. This is from early August in 2020, where Twitter just added a little bit of friction to these Twitter pages where they say, this is Russian state-affiliated media. And they said it on these Twitter pages to kind of warn people, hey, maybe when you look at this, add a little bit of friction there. That's probably, and again, this is up for debate whether this is good or bad. Do they say this for all countries, for all affiliated media? Oh boy, I don't think so. So that's why it's sketchy, but there is, the friction, adding friction is a thing that is good, that we should generally be in favor of, because you need to add some friction to these things in order for stuff not to go crazy. Another way to add friction is to put humans in the loop. So the idea here is something like, and this image is from this piece by The Verge about these Facebook content moderators. So Facebook was having issues with anybody can post anything on Facebook, and then you get a lot of pornography and guns and, people, more... I want to say right wing here, but people who are saying bad, people who are being more, oh God, this is going to get me hurt on the internet. Sorry. People who are saying bad things about other people on the internet, trying to create physical harm. And then you have all these content moderators. You have Facebook with massive scale, 2 billion people. Oh boy, you have these content moderators who then, as humans, start to moderate this content. The issue is that the scale is massive. I think they had 40,000 moderators when I last checked. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more like 100,000 now. So you have to have all these moderators just looking at all of this information. And the content is really intense. So a lot of these moderators get stuff like PTSD from this because they're watching guns and violence and pornography and hate speech all day. And they're trying to determine, is this good or bad? Should I, censor this or not? So putting a human in the loop can be really powerful, but it also has downsides. This leads to a question of where is this moderation okay? What really counts as censorship? And there's this great graph from Stratechery from Ben Thompson that says, you know what? If you are user-facing versus if you're infrastructure versus if you just provide access. So if you provide access, that's like the TCP IP layer. And the idea is at the TCP IP layer, you should be able to send anything. Even if it's, and I don't know, TCP IP, I don't think has even any rules around child pornography or whatever. But once you get further up, something like user-facing around Facebook, then maybe you should have some more discretion there. And to start to say, okay, we're a platform, we want to restrict speech or censor some stuff that we don't think is actually good for people. And so you have discretion and responsibility on the left versus legality being the decision. So if something is illegal, then you should really maybe you should take it down. So something like child pornography, even if it's at a deep low level, for something like there's a thing called Cloudflare, which determines how to do IP stuff on the internet and prevents these denial of service attacks, whatever. It's a deep level infrastructure thing. Cloudflare should generally send whatever they want over the internet, even if it's someone like hate speeching on somebody else. But maybe Cloudflare shouldn't do something that is child pornographic, is child pornography. That is probably not good. So if you're deep down in the stack, if it's illegal, stop it. But if it's anything else, kind of let it flow. If you're higher up in the stack, maybe if you're Facebook, well, you're mostly thinking then about it's. You got to use your own discretion. Should you really share all that? Those like things that are. Should you really amplify? Really hate speechy stuff? Maybe not. So this is just a helpful framework for this that allows the protocols to still exist and to send stuff permissionlessly, while at the higher level taking more discretion around what should get sent. Another key concept here with humans in the loop is to think of computers as a mirror, not a crystal ball. So this often comes up with something like artificial intelligence, where you look at some data, you say, oh, this person is poor. Let's say you look at a bunch of data, you're trying to determine whether to let someone out for bail or whether to put someone in jail or whatever. And you look at the poor person and you say, oh, this person is poor. Well, poverty is correlated with, if we let them out of jail, they have a higher risk of doing something bad. So let's just keep the poor people in jail. That's not great. You don't want that. You want to instead use the computers and the modeling to say, wow, it looks like poverty is really connected to crime rates and to recidivism rates. Let's think more about this and let us use that as a crystal ball to really start to get to the root level here and to start to help poverty more so that we have less crime, or so that we have less high recidivism rates, less high people when they get released from jail earlier committing more crimes. So that's the idea behind humans in the loop. And you can also think of it for networks too, where you just want, if the network is telling you things that are, if the network is telling you to use hate speech or what have you, maybe evaluate why the network is telling you that and to say, oh, what were the human inputs to this network? So yeah, humans in the loop can be very powerful as a way to reduce the friction. Another thing that's very connected to the humans in the loop piece is, that these racism and stuff can get embedded in code. Just like we had racism embedded in laws with stuff like redlining, so too can racism be embedded in code, where you have, with something like the poverty example, or if you say, African-American folks are more likely to have higher recidivism rates. Okay, let's keep them in jail for longer or whatever. It's like, that doesn't feel great. So that is that. Let's now chat about this idea that debates. So if you think about the internet, and we had these permissionless protocols that are sending stuff wherever, and you want to sometimes add friction to those things. The other question is kind of, where does the information naturally get sucked towards? Okay, what attracts attention? And the idea is that these debates attract attention, these internet debates. So the idea here is that, and I thought of this because of these free speech debates. Everybody on the internet is always talking about free speech and censorship, this, blah, blah, blah. And the way to imagine this is that it's this black hole that just sucks people towards it and sucks the attention towards it. There's this great article by Venkatesh Rao called The Internet of Beefs. And the idea is that on the internet, attention is the prime value. If you're trying to get more and more attention to yourself, you're trying to get more followers. And so on social media, what you'll have is this internet of beefs where people are angry at each other. That's what beef means. It's like, I have a beef with you, I don't like you. And people are incentivized to have those debates. So you have a person over here, some influencer, versus some person over here, some other influencer. They're incentivized to be angry at each other, because then that provides them with more people will then, get attracted to them. And then all of the people beneath them are also kind of, they're hating on the other side, and they're also like venerating their leader, their influencer leader. And so that thing is you'll see that on the internet a lot, is people debating with each other, and then the people beneath them who want to get more attention, like talking up to their leaders. So that happens on the internet all the time, and it's very different than this other information that doesn't attract people. So this is an example of information that doesn't attract people, even though it's very important. This is a graph from Our World in Data that says, hey, the world is much better, the world is awful, the world can be much better. You don't need to see all the exact data here, but the key thing is that, hey, if today was like the past, a lot more kids would die of child mortality. And so this is this world is much better line, where it's like you have this huge big amount here where we're going from the red line all the way to the blue line. Things are so much better than in the past. So many less children deaths. And the world is still awful. So many kids are still dying. And 5.5 million children die every year. That's crazy. And so the world can be much better. If we decrease the per capita in all the world to a place like the European Union, then we'll have a lot less deaths. It'll go from 5.5 million to just 550,000. So this idea, hey, the world's much better. Things are so much better than the past. The world today is still bad. It's awful. And it can be much better. We can do a lot better. Let's go, people. Those three ideas, they don't create attention around them. They're just like, oh, here's a truth. Here's a thing we should keep in mind and like try to get better at. But they don't create debate. They don't bring people towards it. It's just like, oh, here's a truth. And this is why things like this are not shared that much. You don't have people like congregating around things like this. You have people congregating around internet debates. So I like to think of it as these debates being anti-fragile. So something like this is not anti-fragile. It is just like, here's the truth. And then if you ask a little bit more about it, it's like, oh yeah, this is mostly true, blah, blah. Versus these other debates, which are anti-fragile. And anti-fragile means that for every, it's like a hydra head. For every little thing you chop off, you get more about it. So, for something like the free speech debates, you can ask, oh, is XYZ censorship? Is this deplatforming? Is this a restriction of free speech? There's so many different sub-arguments and everything, and people can argue XYZ, and you can argue about language, and there's so many just branches of these things that it sucks all the information towards it. And everybody's incentivized to suck the information towards it, because if you're in that loop, more people are liking your stuff, you're an influencer, blah, blah. And so that's an issue. I call this an anti-fragile attractor, which means that it is a thing that when you hit it more, when change happens to it, when you chop off more hydra heads, when you ask questions about free speech, it just creates more and more. And then that thing brings more and more people to it, and it just attracts, like a gravity well, just attracts more and more people towards it. So this is just a crucial a way to see things on the internet. It's like, okay, what debate is happening? What are the incentives of the people in this debate? And why aren't they just saying something like, hey, here's the TLDR, let's agree to disagree? The other thing that sucks information towards it is, the other way the attention economy works is that Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, especially Google, Amazon, Facebook, they want your time and your data. And this is what they call the attention economy, which is, the economy of the internet. And the idea is that there's this arms race for attention. If you're YouTube, you want more and more time. And so what you'll do is you'll maybe addict your people and say like, hey, don't forget to, let's do an autoplay thing. Let's just keep you on our site. And then Facebook is like, oh God, too many people are going over to YouTube. Let's make an autoplay on our website too. And before you know it, Netflix has an autoplay, YouTube has an autoplay, TikTok everybody has autoplays, because they're battling with each other for attention. And then you just feel addicted to the internet. And this is because advertising money comes from time on site multiplied by data about your user. AKA, if I'm a person who's on the website, if I spend a lot of time on there and you know a lot about me, then you can send me a lot of ads that are personalized to me that you can make a lot of money on. And so that's why companies maximize time and data. They try to keep you on the site as long as possible, and they try to get more data about you to keep you there because they know you better, and to sell more advertisements because they know you better. And that is sad, and that's what we get. There's this book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, which deeply goes into this problem and issue with society. Okay, so that's what permissionlessness leads to. Illegal activity, less friction generally, which can be good or bad. You might need humans in the loop. These debates that are just attracting people towards it. And then this Google, Amazon, Facebook folks who are attracted to your time and your data as well. Okay, what does permissionlessness feel like in your body? A bit tiring. It also makes me think of just the friction piece, that so much of these, decreasing the friction around things is really, really, really good. It's amazing that we can send information around the world for free. And we do need to add friction to stuff. Okay, interactive time. What was the last internet black hole that you went down? Was it worth your time? What personal needs did it meet? And how much of it was you being sucked towards some kind of internet debate? And how much of it was the attention economy or the platform addicting you without you realizing it? Second question, do you think platforms are overreaching with their nudges? How should they prioritize content on their platforms? What is a page rank for knowledge? Yeah, so the idea here is, man, if everybody has autoplays now, or everybody now uses the feed because it's very dopamine-y for us, it's like a slot machine. Well, is there a better way to prioritize content on platforms? How would we create these new protocols or platforms that actually optimize for knowledge and wisdom? Okay, so that is today's episode. We learned about information abundance and permissionlessness, and what it will feel like to integrate your learning and things to watch out for. Well, you'll start to think about the information abundance piece. There's just a lot of info. You'll see the good info, you'll see the bad info, and you'll start to see some of the bad info as kind of inevitable. You're like, okay, whatever. But you'll also be really aware of your own sense-making processes and try to search for more good info. The other crucial thing here is that, the internet is just bigger than you think. You have these big winners, which are really, really big. Facebook doesn't just have 100,000 users. They have 2 billion users, like a fourth of the world population. And so you have these massive, massive winners and these small niches. You have so many of them. It's amazing. You can find anything on the internet, I hear. The other thing you'll start to do with permissionlessness is just really start to think in terms of friction. Where are the platforms adding friction? Where can you add friction in your own life to interact with the internet better? How do we go from the world of bits into the world of atoms? How can we add humans to the loop? You'll also start to see these attractors, whether it is, just as you're engaging with the internet and thinking about what you're being sucked towards or what other people are being sucked towards. And you're like, is that how connected is that? This is connected to point number 5 here, which is differentiating bits from atoms, where you're like, okay, is that internet debate, is that mostly just self-referential? Or is it actually connected to some human needs in reality? If so, awesome, keep having it. If not, maybe don't keep having circular debates. And a thing to watch out for here is, as all of this stuff is happening, it can feel like, you have this information abundance, you have these, permissionless protocols. It kind of feels inevitable. But remember, you can see yourself as an agent with free will, that things are changeable, that we can prioritize good info over bad. We can create, we can start to regulate these platforms in good ways. We can find amazing small niches and start to maybe get rid of the bad ones or whatever. We can add friction where we should. We can, develop an attraction to lovely attractors, and we can start to think about, the world of bits and really connect it to our own needs and the world of atoms. So that is today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're well. And if you like this or want to learn more, check out the Root Fellowship, which is a community of world-class systems thinkers. Check us out at root.co. Thanks and goodbye.